Your family stories matter. Preserve them forever with a custom video interview from Persona. Our team of journalists will ask all the right questions and produce a video you'll treasure. For more information, go to personacustominterviews.com. Hi everyone, welcome back to Persona Interviews. I'm Rob Simmelcare. We're going to continue our series of interviews with the candidates for local office here in Westport, Connecticut. My colleague Jen Berkiker sat down with Republican candidate for the Board of Education, Liz Heyer.
Well, I'm here with Liz Heyer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So since some people, you're new running for Board of Ed, so can you just explain what has motivated you to get into this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Westport, graduated Staples, and the reason that I moved back to this town was really for the schools and for the sense of community that Westport has always had and has been such an important thing to me growing up. And I really wanted that for my family. And as I've been involved in a lot of the educational issues over the last couple years, I really noticed that in particular in the last year, both the schools and the sense of community really suffered a little bit. And I just felt compelled to be part of the solution in terms of unifying our community and helping get our district back on track.
How are you going to get that done? We would love that.
It's a good question. I think the most important thing is really bringing a sense of discipline for decision making to the board and the leadership. I think we have oftentimes not truly understood our objectives of the things that we're deciding and not effectively prioritized our criteria for how we're deciding them. And so I think that if we have a real framework for decision making and a discipline around it, it will be much easier to make more effective decisions and find optimal solutions.
Are there anything specific you think could have been done differently in the last year? I mean, it was such a crazy year, and maybe your partner Vic experienced it firsthand. So is there anything that you guys think could be improved?
I think if you take redistricting, for instance, that's a good example of where there was a rush to sort of decide how we should redistrict, and there wasn't the forethought to think about what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve with redistricting. Is it to balance enrollment? Is it to better utilize our schools in terms of enrollment? Or is it to maintain parity in the educational system or program that we're offering? And I would argue that the biggest reason would really be to make sure that we're offering parity in our educational programming across both middle schools. And I think many of the scenarios that were initially presented and reviewed had not focused on even defining parity. And so if we take a step back and try to define parity, which Vic and I would define as the same educational model at both schools, the same delivery of the educational curriculum and the same course offerings and then similar class size. I think if you look at those objectives and then try to determine whether or not redistricting is necessary and how much do you have to redistrict, you end up at a different conclusion than maybe some of the scenarios we've seen.
What's your conclusion based on where we are now? I know you can't predict where this is going.
So I think that it's very important to Vic and I that we advocate for parity in our educational systems and a strong educational system. So we feel very strongly about maintaining the 4-teacher team model, which our principal spoke very eloquently about. So that's one thing. And I think that if we focus on that and make sure that we have enough teaching teams to meet our current enrollment, keeping, of course, projections at the forethought, but if we make sure we have enough teaching teams, which is 5 teams, to meet our current enrollment, then when you look at that, it really improves the overall value proposition of Westport's education because it lowers the average class size across both our middle schools, and it prevents us from making very disruptive redistricting changes right now when they may not be warranted in the future based on the way the projections are looking.
Okay, so we can achieve that balance without redistricting right now?
Yes. To be clear, I think, just so nothing gets misinterpreted, I think that we can achieve it without having to disrupt our current families right now. I do think there may be some minor course corrections that we might want to think about to sort of set the ship back on the correct path, but those are things that we can look at doing without affecting current families. And we can, if we maintain sort of the core of our educational model, that 4-teacher team model, and have enough of those teams to meet our enrollment, then we should be on the right track.
I think a concern a lot of people have is, what if CMS doesn't get finished on time? What if it's not on budget? What if there's like a wrench gets thrown into this plan?
Yeah. So I think from everything that we've seen in terms of the Coleytown Middle School Building Committee, they are on track for where they said they would be. I mean, I completely understand, you know, the concern about, well, I don't see any demolition, I don't see any hammers swinging yet. But if we go back to the initial timeline that they had put out when everyone agreed and approved the $32 million, they had never predicted for construction to have started yet. So they're not behind. And it's a really confidence-inspiring team. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be open in August 2020, and I believe that is true. I think there were a lot of changes made from how the middle school was functioning as, you know, one combined middle school from last year to this year. And I think there's definitely a sense among the community that it's functioning significantly better than it functioned last year. Does that mean it's perfect? No. Does that mean, you know, that's what we want for Westport education for the future? I would argue no. But it's functioning smoothly enough that if we had to maintain that for another year, I think that we could.
Okay, but are you fully committed to having 2 middle schools versus 1?
Absolutely.
What about the last board meeting? A lot of discussion came up about other improvements that are needed and expenses, and how crucial are these? What's the priority, and can we afford it?
So I think one of the things we really need to do is figure out what is the process and who owns the management of the infrastructure. I mean, there's obviously building maintenance that we need to take care of. There's investment in our buildings in terms of preventative care, and then there's also investment that we want to make for strategic educational reasons, and we don't want to lose sight of that either. So I think we need to really get together with our Board of Finance and some of our other town bodies and sit down and outline the process and the structure for how building, you know, infrastructure is managed, particularly the school facilities, for going forward. Because I think that sort of gap in the process is what led us to the situation we're in now.
Right. Another major thing happening right now is the search for a superintendent.
Yes.
So how is this being prioritized, and where are we with that?
It's definitely a priority. You know, it's definitely a number one priority, along with a couple others, of course. And the search is underway. I mean, I think that we're confident we'll have a superintendent before the next school year and when Dr. Abby's term is up. So I'm not concerned that it's delayed by any means, and we're looking forward to finding someone who is really a great fit for our town. Great.
What's it been like for you campaigning right now? Is this your first time running for office?
First time. It's been great, actually. I really enjoy meeting with people, and I think hearing everyone's, you know, concerns, questions, positions. I mean, I've always been of the mindset that, you know, just because I have an idea or have a belief or an interpretation of something, that doesn't mean it's necessarily absolute or perfect. And I welcome people's questions and, you know, attempts to sort of poke holes in things that we think, because that is the only way that we are going to come out with an optimal, really strong solution that will work. And campaigning it's really been rewarding. It's sort of re-energized my commitment to why I'm doing this.
One last question.
Sure.
School start time is also on the agenda. Is this something that we need to look at seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely do. I think there's enough justification for considering to move the start time a little bit later. I am supportive of the compromise that the school committee for start times had gotten to, which is to push schools back about a half an hour later, push everything back a half an hour later. I think there are still considerations that we're going to need to address, like early childcare for working parents. So I think there are things that we're going to need to work through, but I'm confident that we should look to work through them.
Great. I think that's all we have time for. But thank you so much, Liz. Good luck.
Thanks for having me.